It's almost impossible to ignore the shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you see wind farms, solar panels everywhere.
Yeah, renewables are definitely gaining momentum. Good for the environment, clearly.
But, for anyone wanting to really understand how things work, there's this big question.
How do we keep the lights on reliably?
Exactly. When so much power depends on, well, the weather, which is, unpredictable.
That's precisely the nut we're trying to crack in this deep dive. We've gone through a whole load of really interesting sources,
Right.
all looking at these variable renewable energy sources, VREs they often call them, and how they fit into the grid we have now.
And we're not just saying, oh, wind and solar vary. That's obvious.
I don't know. The aim is to get into the how. How does that variability actually mess with the grid? And maybe more importantly, what are we actually doing about it? What strategies work?
Absolutely. We've looked at stuff covering, well, pretty much everything. Forecasting tech, the kind of surprising problem of too much renewable power sometimes.
Right. Overproduction.
Yeah.
And storage, obviously.
Yeah.
Supply chains even.
Yeah. So for you listening, if you want to be properly informed, the question we're really digging into is, how do we ensure that energy supply stays dependable when the sources themselves are so flighty?
Dependent on things we just can't pin down easily.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So the core issue, like you said, it's this inherent unpredictability.
Uh-huh.
Solar power, well, you've got the day-night cycle, obviously. But even during the day, clouds, they can cut output by, up to 60% sometimes?
60%? Wow. And seasons matter too, right? Less sun in winter.
Oh, massively. Winter solar generation can plummet. We're talking maybe like an eighth of summer production in some places.
An eighth, okay. And wind. Similar story, different details.
Pretty much. Wind has its own quirks. You get these wind droughts, just long stretches with hardly any wind.
Right. Not helpful.
Not at all. And then the opposite problem, storms. If winds get too high, over 55 miles per hour or so, they have to shut the turbines down for safety.
Ah, okay. Didn't think about that. And freezing, you mentioned.
Yeah, freezing weather can be a real issue for turbines, too.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I thought. It's not just like a cloudy afternoon or a calm day here and there.
No, the sources talk about these seasonal renewable droughts.
Right, where multiple things go wrong at once.
Exactly. You can have low wind, low sun, and maybe low water levels for hydro all happening at the same time.
For how long?
Potentially for months. Some sources mentioned up to 5 months, driven by these big weather patterns like Scandinavian blocking or the North Atlantic oscillation.
5 months.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so the grid wasn't built for this, was it?
Not really. It was designed for, steady, predictable power from fossil fuel plants. Turn it on, it runs.
Uh-huh.
This fluctuating input, it really introduces risk. Grid instability, maybe even blackouts if we don't manage it properly.
Okay, so that's the challenge laid bare. What about the solutions? It sounds like a massive puzzle.
It is complex, yeah. But the sources point to a multi-pronged approach, which is encouraging.
Okay, like what?
Well, one big piece is just making the whole system more flexible.
Flexible, how?
Having other power sources ready to jump in or ramp down quickly. Think gas turbines, hydropower. They can adjust their output fast.
Okay.
And demand response is part of that, too, getting consumers and industry to change when they use power.
Demand response. That's like maybe getting incentives to charge your EV when the sun's shining brightest.
Exactly, that kind of thing. And then there's the grid operations themselves, making them smarter, faster.
How so?
Things like faster scheduling, moving from, say, hourly updates to maybe 5-minute intervals for dispatching power.
5 minutes. That's quick.
Yeah, and one source suggested that could cut integration costs by potentially 50%. Huge savings.
Wow.
Plus, better real-time forecasting and these things called ancillary services.
Ancillary services.
They're like support functions that keep the grid stable, managing frequency, voltage, stuff that becomes even more critical with renewables jumping around.
Got it. Technical, but important.
Very. And even things like communication standards, like this IEC 61850, are helping create smarter grids that can talk to all the different bits, solar panels, batteries, etc., in real time.
Like a common language for the grid.
Sort of, yeah. Makes everything work together better.
Okay, so flexibility, that's one major pillar. What's next? Storage has to be in here somewhere.
Oh, absolutely crucial. The sources talk about 2 main types, really.
Okay.
You've got your short-duration storage. That's mostly batteries. Great for smoothing things out over minutes or hours.
Like dealing with that evening drop when the sun goes down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
California is using batteries heavily for that. They can provide maybe up to 40% of the needed flexibility in solar-heavy systems.
Okay. And the other type?
That's long-duration or seasonal storage. Think pumping water uphill, then letting it flow down later.
Right, the classic.
Yeah. Or potentially green hydrogen in the future, storing energy for weeks, even months.
So that tackles those seasonal renewable droughts we talked about.
Precisely. You need something to bridge those longer gaps. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, points to existing hydro reservoirs playing a big role here too.
Makes sense. Both short-term balancing and long-term reserves. Oh, forecasting. We touched on it, but how good are we actually getting at predicting this stuff?
It's vital, and yeah, it's getting much more sophisticated. One big trend is centralized forecasting.
Centralized, meaning one group does it for everyone.
Pretty much. The system operator, the main grid manager, forecasts for the whole region. That gives consistency.
Avoids everyone doing their own thing differently.
Exactly. And it tends to lower the overall uncertainty because you're looking at the big picture, the aggregated output.
Okay.
And they use clever techniques like ensemble forecasts.
Ensemble, like in music.
Sort of. It means combining results from lots of different prediction models. Helps cancel out biases in any single model, like getting a second, third, 10th opinion.
Okay, like checking multiple weather apps.
That's a great analogy, yeah. Then there's nowcasting.
Nowcasting.
Super short-term predictions, using real-time data radar, satellite images to say what's happening in the next few minutes or hours. Very accurate for the immediate future.
Right. And AI is involved now too, I bet.
Oh, yeah. AI and machine learning are crunching huge data sets to spot patterns and just get more accurate over time.
So the key is plugging all this smart forecasting into the actual grid operations.
Absolutely. Tying it into those faster markets, like the 5-minute ones, so the grid can react quickly based on the latest prediction. And even just spreading out renewables geographically helps forecasting because you aggregate across different weather patterns. Smooths out the errors.
Right. Don't put all your wind turbines in one valley.
Basically, yeah.
Okay. Seems we're getting better at prediction. You mentioned demand-side management again earlier. How do we actually get consumers involved in balancing the grid?
It's about making demand flexible, treating it almost like a power source itself.
How? Paying people to use less power.
That's part of it. Dynamic pricing is one tool. Electricity costs more when demand is super high and renewables are low. Gives you an incentive to shift your usage.
Like running the dishwasher overnight instead of at 6 p.m.
Exactly. Or direct load control, where the utility, with your permission of course, can briefly adjust things like your smart thermostat or water heater. And big industrial users can shift their heavy processes to times when there's lots of cheap renewable power available.
Does this actually make a difference?
It can, yeah. In Texas, ERCOT apparently gets a big chunk, maybe half of its spinning reserves, from these demand response programs.
Spinning reserves. That's the backup power ready to go instantly.
That's the one. So demand response is providing that buffer.
Fascinating. Turning demand into a resource. What about the renewables themselves? Can we build them smarter?
Definitely. Hybrid systems are one idea, putting solar and wind together at the same site.
Because they often produce at different times. Sun during the day, maybe more wind at night.
Exactly. They can complement each other. Smooths out the output from that one location.
Makes sense.
And just spreading projects out geographically, like we mentioned for forecasting. If it's not windy here, it might be windy over there.
Right.
Reduces the overall risk. Bolivia was mentioned as using this approach.
So diversification in technology and location.
That's the idea. And finally, none of this works without the right policies and markets.
The regulations and money side.
Yeah. You need market rules that actually pay for flexibility, that reward storage. Things like capacity markets, which pay generators just to be available as backup.
Okay.
Even tweaking rules about when renewables have to be curtailed, like during storms, can help manage costs. It's all connected.
Okay. So a lot of strategies for managing the ups and downs, but one source brought up the flip side, the risk of too much renewable energy. Overproduction. Sounds counterintuitive, right? Isn't more clean energy always better?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But yeah, generating way more renewable power than the grid needs at that moment, especially when demand is low, causes problems.
Like what?
Well, the most obvious is curtailment. You just have to waste the energy, shut down wind turbines or disconnect solar panels even when they could be producing.
Wasting clean energy, that feels wrong.
It's inefficient, definitely. And it can even destabilize the grid if it's not managed carefully. Pushing too much power in can cause frequency or voltage issues.
Okay.
Any other downsides? Yeah, economically it can be disruptive. If you constantly have periods of massive oversupply, electricity prices can crash to zero or even go negative.
Negative prices. You have to pay people to take your electricity.
It happens, which sounds great for consumers maybe, but it makes it really hard for renewable project developers to make money, right? Discourages investment if returns are unpredictable.
Yeah, okay. Bad for future growth.
Potentially. Plus, it strains supply chains for materials, might force costly grid upgrades sooner than planned. And there are environmental aspects, too. Maybe overbuilding leads to more mining impacts or using land less efficiently.
So it's about finding that balance. Enough renewables, but not so much at the wrong times that it causes chaos or gets wasted.
Exactly. It highlights the need for storage and flexibility even more.
Right. Now, we keep coming back to weather. One source really hammered home just how dominant it is.
It's fundamental. Everything traces back to it. High heat, for instance, actually makes solar panels less efficient.
Really? By how much?
Can be significant, maybe 10–25% drop in efficiency in extreme heat. And we already mentioned clouds cutting output, maybe 60%.
Okay. And wind?
Totally weather dependent. Those wind droughts are a killer. And the shutdowns and storms or freezes, even hydropower depends on rain and snowmelt, so droughts hit that too.
And this feeds back into those seasonal renewable droughts again.
Exactly, where multiple weather-driven factors combine to reduce output across different renewable types for a long time. It's a compound risk.
And extreme weather can just break stuff too, right? Hurricanes, storms.
Absolutely. Physical damage to turbines, panels, transmission lines, that's another layer of weather risk.
So what are the specific weather mitigation strategies? Better forecasting again.
That's a big part of it. Short-term forecasting, using machine learning to optimize the grid second by second based on current conditions, and longer-term seasonal forecasting, trying to predict those multi-week energy droughts by looking at large-scale climate patterns.
And making the equipment tougher.
Yeah, infrastructure resilience, things like cold weather packages for wind turbines, making sure transmission lines can withstand storms. It's all part of adapting.
It really sounds like understanding meteorology is almost as important as electrical engineering in this new grid.
It's becoming incredibly intertwined, yeah.
Okay, now one last specific point from the sources, this idea of centralized versus decentralized forecasting. Can you break down the difference for us?
Sure. It's basically about who does the forecasting.
Yeah.
In a centralized system, the main grid operator, the entity managing the whole system, does the forecasting for all the wind and solar plants in their area.
One forecast to rule them all.
Pretty much. It gives them a single, consistent view of what's expected across the entire system.
The advantages.
Generally, more consistency, lower overall uncertainty because they can aggregate everything, usually more cost-effective too, pooling resources for sophisticated models. And crucially, the forecast is directly plugged into their own grid operation decisions.
Makes sense. Coordinated, so decentralized is.
Decentralized is where each individual wind farm or solar plant owner is responsible for creating their own forecast for their plant.
Okay, so lots of separate forecasts.
Exactly. The potential upside is maybe more local innovation, tailoring forecasts to very specific site conditions.
But the downside?
Well, you can get huge variations in quality and methods. The grid operator then has the tricky job of collecting all these different forecasts, trying to make sense of them, and adding them up. It can be complex, costly, and maybe less reliable overall for the system.
So which approach is winning out?
The sources lean pretty heavily towards centralized forecasting, being the better practice for large, complex grids with lots of renewables. It just offers better coordination and lower uncertainty for managing the whole system efficiently.
Okay, so for most big grids, centralized seems the way to go.
That seems to be the consensus, yeah.
Well, this has been really fascinating. A
Yeah.
proper deep dive into something that feels incredibly complex, but also, solvable.
It is complex. Managing this variability, it's not one simple fix, but yeah, there's a huge amount of innovation and strategic thinking going into it.
It really takes everything, doesn't it? Tech like storage and forecasting, smart grid operations, the right policies, and just understanding the weather better.
Absolutely. A holistic approach, as they say.
So I guess the key takeaway for me, and hopefully for you listening, is that, yeah, the variability is a real challenge, no doubt about it.
Definitely.
But there are so many strategies being worked on and rolled out. It's not like we're stuck. We're actively building this reliable, cleaner energy future.
It's a dynamic space, constantly evolving, constantly improving.
Right. Which kind of leads to a final thought, maybe.
Go on.
Well, as we get more and more renewables, much higher percentages than today, how do these management strategies need to change again? How do they scale up?
That's the big question, isn't it? Especially with climate patterns maybe becoming even more unpredictable.
Yeah. Will the current tools be enough? What completely new ideas or technologies might we need in, say, 10 or 20 years to keep this renewable grid stable and efficient?
What's the next breakthrough we haven't even thought of yet? It's definitely a space to keep a very close eye on.